Imagine a world where famine was still the biggest cause of death. A world where the biggest question over humanity's future was not climate change or war, but food. A world where half the people in this room did not exist. This is the world that we would live in without the Haber process. To understand the true importance of the Haber process, we first need to understand a little bit about the world before it. The year is 1900. The population is 1.6 billion. The life expectancy is only 35. In the past century, the population has grown by 600 million people, the biggest increase seen in human history. To support the world's burgeoning population, the world has turned to fertilizers. In Japan, the dangerous practice of night soil trading has arisen, where human feces are collected and then used as fertilizers to grow massive amounts of plants. But this leads to contamination and diseases, which eventually lead to massive diseases in the population. Meanwhile, in the West, the guano trade flourishes. Guano, the feces of birds, is something which is rich in nitrates, making it an ideal fertilizer. However, the guano trade was dangerous and also had massive amounts of exploitation. To give an idea of how large it got, in the 19th century, Peru, one of the biggest exporters of guano, became the richest country in South America, simply off the back of this worldwide trade. But as the 20th century dawned, the supplies of natural fertilizer had been exhausted. They could no longer keep up with such a large population, with such a demanding population. And so, as the world entered the 20th century, a question loomed over it. How would it feed the masses? This was the world that Fritz Haber was born into. Born in 1868, Fritz Haber showed an early talent for chemistry. Attending the St. Elizabeth Classical School in Breslau, he then chose to continue his studies in chemistry at the University of Heidelberg, followed by the University of Berlin, and then the Technical School in Charlottenburg. Specializing in electrochemical reactions, he finally turned his attention to the problem of nitrogen fixation in 1902. 2 years later, he had a solution, the Haber process, for which he later won the Nobel Prize in 1918. However, it's also important to note that later on in his career, Haber took a darker path, choosing to experiment with chemical weapons, using much of the same chemistry that he developed for the Haber process, committing many war atrocities, leaving a dark mire on an otherwise brilliant legacy. To understand the significance of the Haber process, it's also important to understand a little bit about the process itself. In order to grow, plants need several things: water and glucose in order to respire, mineral ions such as calcium and potassium for enzymes to work, but they also need nitrates for crucial processes such as protein synthesis and DNA replication. Now, these nitrates are normally provided by things such as nitrogen-fixating bacteria in the soil, who use energy that they gather from respiration to take nitrogen from the air and slowly turn them into nitrates. But if you're trying to massively farm a field to feed many people, this process is simply too slow. And so we must turn to artificial fertilizers. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, what's the problem? If plants need nitrates, why can we not simply pluck it out of the air? After all, nitrates are just nitrogen and oxygen, the two most abundant gases on Earth. Why can we not simply take them from the air, make nitrates, and give them to the plants? Well, as some of you may know, nitrogen is a diatomic molecule. In fact, it's a diatomic molecule held together by a triple covalent bond. A bond which is so ridiculously strong that it requires over 1,000 degrees in the presence of an iron catalyst without the Haber process to break it. In 1900, this amount of energy was simply unfeasible. If you wanted to take nitrogen and turn it into nitrates, the amount of money that that energy would cost would exceed the economic value of the plant you were trying to grow. Economically nonsensical. Haber's great innovation was simply creating a process that was more energy efficient. In the Haber process, hydrogen and nitrogen are mixed together at 500 degrees Celsius under a crushing atmosphere of 200 times the normal pressure on Earth. In the presence of an iron and potassium oxide catalysts, slowly hydrogen atoms are added to one of the nitrogen atoms in the nitrogen molecule. And with each hydrogen atom added, one of the bonds between the two nitrogen atoms breaks. Step by step, after 3 substitutions have occurred and 3 hydrogen atoms have been added onto the nitrogen breaks off from its counterpart, forming ammonia. This ammonia can then be taken and turned into anything with a low nitrogen, such as nitrates, without much energy being expended. Because the bond is broken in steps rather than all at once, a lower temperature is required because you don't need as much energy to be injected into the system as quickly, meaning that a lower energy cost is required, finally making it possible to produce nitrates on an industrial scale. Now, I started this talk rather dramatically, describing a world without the Haber process. But was this simply hyperbole? Well, current estimates state that without the Haber process, the maximum sustainable population of the world would halve. 4 billion people would not exist. Imagine a world where great leaders such as Nelson Mandela were never born. Perhaps apartheid would have continued. Where great scientists and inventors such as Robert Noyce, the creator of the computer chip, never existed. Perhaps the computer chip would not exist either. The technology that defines the 21st century would never have been created. Imagine a world where the countries that benefited the most from the Haber process, China and India, the powerhouses of the global economy, never arose, still mired by problems such as famine and their burgeoning population. The 20th century would not be possible. The Haber process in itself was not a revolutionary new piece of science, not like relativity or the computer chip. In fact, if Haber did not discover it, someone else probably would have. What the Haber process actually was a catalyst for human growth. The evidence for this is everywhere. In just 100 years, we went from inventions like the steam engine to landing on the moon. We went from light bulbs to mobile phones. Never before has humanity seen such a rapid pace of change. And there must be a reason. There must have been a turning point. There must have been a moment. And I think it is only fair to say that the moment that caused this was the discovery and creation of the Haber process. Thank you.